All right, now we're recording. I assume some people are going to join us along the way. So tonight I want to talk about your articles. Before we get to that, I want to talk to about the Dave Chase article, the short article we read online, and then for that, talk about the John Kotter book that I reviewed in an outline. So I kind of walk through that quickly. Let's go to share organizational change. Okay. All right. So. We have the classic definition of insanity by Albert Einstein. It's really understand, right? This class is about organizational change, and understand organizational change is very difficult to pull off, right? So John Kotter is a Harvard business professor who wrote about strategy a lot, and then he found out writing about strategy is one thing, getting people to do it is another. So then he started writing about leadership and organizational change, both as their own topics, not just how they support strategy changes, but it's a very big deal. And he's got a lot of insights. His books are, he has a number of books on leading change. He also has one that's like a Socratic method where he talks about, there's a picture of penguins on here. He has a book where he talks this little fable about these penguins and how they're trying to change and what they're trying to do and how they go about it. And in this little story about these penguins, he interweaves a lot of things he's seen both right and that can go right and wrong with organizational change. So they're pretty easy books to read. This leading change book I have a picture of. This isn't a fable. This is basically blow by blow describing how to do it. I'm going to skip down a little bit on my presentation where it talks about change. So basically, from Kotter's standpoint, there are 8 steps to organizational change. There's 8 steps, and you have to take them in order. And most of the time, people just skip right past the first step. That's why I have it in bold. And really, if you don't take time and establish a sense of urgency for step 1, the rest of it usually doesn't matter. You have to convince people there's a desperate need for change. Now, sometimes they already have that change. Their company's failing. They know they're going to be laid off. It's only a matter of time till the Grim Reaper shows up and they get laid off. So changes need to happen. So sometimes people already come to the conclusion that things need to change and they need to change now. But if not, then whoever's trying to drive this change needs to establish a sense of urgency, whatever that may be. I guess we could, well, we'll go through these quickly and then we'll come back and talk about them kind of one by one. But from Kotter's standpoint, he nicknamed it the burning platform in the second bullet there, right? You got to convince people where we are now is not a tenable position. We must change. Right? And the more emphasis on change, the hotter the fire, the quicker we can get people to move. So I knew when I started my career out of college, I worked with some guys who used to work at Chrysler Automotive when it almost went out of business back in, I think it was around 1980, right? That's when Lee Iacocca took over and basically pulled them up by their own bootstraps. And it was interesting to hear him talking about that. Usually when a new boss comes to town and wants to change everything, people are very, very hesitant to do that. At Chrysler, they knew they had a year or two and they were going to go out of business. People are going to lose their jobs. They're going to lose their pensions. They're going to lose their seniority, health benefits, the whole thing. So people were very supportive of any change Iacocca wanted to propose because they knew the change might be risky, but for sure, if things stayed the same, they were going to lose their job. I mean, they were that sure of it. So it actually helped them make the changes. Deming, the quality guru, the one who taught the Japanese how to do statistical process control, and he got paid a lot of money by a lot of companies to go in and tell him what was wrong. I've heard of videos of him speaking. He would say things like, if you got a company that's doing okay, just okay, it's difficult to get them to change. If you got a company that really thinks the workers think they're in trouble, it's much easier to make changes and have the company improve, right? So I can't, we'll come back to it, but I can't overstress this enough that establishing a sense of urgency, right? Don't pass go, don't collect $200 if you don't do that, right? It doesn't make any sense to go on until you do that, right? It's hard to do the rest. It's basically impossible to do the rest until you've done that one. Okay, step 2 is create a guiding, establish a sense of urgency, right? Sources of complacency, reasons we don't think we need to change, right? There's an absence of visible crisis. Budgets are okay. People are still getting raises. The second budget, management doesn't like to acknowledge the problem. They want everything's good, everything's fine, things are going great. They don't like to talk about reality too much. Number 3, there's too many visible resources. Again, we haven't tightened our belts. We haven't tightened it all. We're just ignoring the problem. 4, organizational metrics that focus on narrow functional goals. So, hey, my department's meeting their goals. What's the problem, right? I should get my raise. My department's meeting their goals, even though the whole business might be going under. Maybe what we need is more external feedback from people that are in the know, who can tell us what the reality truly is, not as we wish it to be, right? Or we just go with the old school kill the messenger kind of thing. And so, I mean, so these are reasons why a lot of companies don't feel like there's much trouble as there really is. Right, so step 2 in this, right, step 2, we're going to create a guided coalition, and that coalition is going to go to step 3, creating a vision and strategy. So creating a guided coalition, how do we do that, right? And this is where you guys would be very interested in going into an organization, try to get them to change their benefits. You need to assemble a group with enough power to lead change, right? Easier said than done, but you need to put together a group. They have to work together as a team. They should be from different walks of the business, different areas of the business or of the organization, right? So they can help lead change, as opposed to a small group of people get in a room, work something out, and then roll it out for everybody else. So people have to feel represented in this group, whatever this group happens to be. Right? And once you get this group from different parts of the business, including some power people in that group, right, then you got to develop a vision and a strategy. Right? Create a vision to help direct the change effort, develop strategies to achieve that vision. So, right, the third bullet here kind of ties it all together. If the burning platform is what compels the organization to move, the vision must be what the organization wants to move towards. So first, you got to get in people's heads, we got to go. We can't stay here anymore, we got to go. Then the next question they should ask themselves is, okay, where we're going. That's when this group, right, tells its vision, this is where we're going. Right? And then another a key is then we're going to communicate the vision. We don't send an email. We don't tell people once. We have to tell people over and over and over. If you've ever been in a organization going through a lot of change, right, it has to come up over and over and over again. Some of us have been in organizations where we get the flavor of the month kind of approach. Management wants to do something new. It's a flavor of the month thing. And a certain number of people, maybe me, will sit there and say, well, let's just wait till this goes away. Let's see if it sticks. We'll just kind of stay on the sideline for a couple months, see if this goes away, or see if it's something I really have to participate in. Right? So we have to communicate the vision to the employees over and over and over again. Right? Elements of a great vision, right? We have to communicate it in a clear and exciting manner. People should understand it and they should be excited about it. Right? Develop a strategic vision that spells out a course to pursue this. So where is it we're going? How are we going to get there? Right? Key points. Right? And communicating this change vision, use every vehicle possible to constantly communicate the new vision strategies. Every major meeting should start out with an update on how we doing with this new, achieving our way to this new vision, over and over and over again. Right? And the guiding coalition, this team that's enacting this, should act as role models, right, to what people's behavior should be, how people should pay attention to this thing, how it's a really big deal. Okay, so now we have a group of people, we have a problem, a group of people got together, they have the vision to solve the problem, then we're communicating and plan on what we're going to do now. Right? So once we want people to start move there, so what do we need to do? We need to empower broad-based action. So we need to get rid of obstacles. Things like rules, work procedures, structures in HR, structure and payroll, things that get in the way of this thing we want to do, right? We may have to remove some of those things. Right? Changing systems or structures that undermine the new vision, right? The systems and structures were created to support the old vision. Now we have a new vision, so we may need system and structures. There'll be many people happy to sit at the table and tell you, we can't do that because of this rule, right? You have to tell them, yeah, that's all part of the process. We got to go through and change the rules. Right? We also got to encourage risk-taking and non-traditional ideas. So empowering broad-based action, we try to get the rest of the organization to help us now. We need people to start jumping on board. And then when these people jump on board, right, we need to generate short-term wins. Many people, probably the bulk of them, will be sitting on the sidelines or watching and waiting, see, is this thing going to go? Is it going to be successful? So they're looking to see signs of success. So we need to figure out what might be a short-term win, what might be something we could do in the short term, right, that would have a win that's going to get rewards for people. So it's sort of like when a football team plays a weak team the first game of the season to get a win, right, early, right? We want to do that. We want to establish a record of winning, and we want to create those wins and then visibly recognizing and rewarding people who made those wins possible. So we want to make heroes out of the people that pulled off the early wins to show that the organization supports people doing this, and rewards will be forthcoming. So we start having some early wins, we start giving some early rewards. That will get attention from the people on the fence, the people who can't decide if they want to jump in or not, right? Then we're going to consolidate gains and start producing more change. So this increased credibility of rewards for people doing the right changes, right, we'll get the ball rolling a little more, right? And then we need to hire, promote, and develop people who can implement the change vision. So now the resource, we're starting to get the personnel in the organization lined up with the new vision, right? And then every so often, we're going to have to reinvigorate the process with new project themes, new change agents. We're going to have to pick new battles and win them to keep the ball rolling. It can't be the same argument over and over again, right? Many changes die in year 3. That's about how long people can focus on the same thing. So we need to create a new battle and go win it, even though it can be the same idea, right? So once we get these consolidated gains and producing more chains, right, then we need to anchor the new approaches in the culture so that the new way of doing things becomes the standard way of doing things, right? So we're going to articulate the connections between new behaviors and organizational success, right? That'll convince people this is the way to work. This is how we're going to do it, right? So the new way, or the old new way, becomes the way, right? Be careful though, don't set that anchor too deep, because at some point in the future, we're probably going to change again. Nothing is forever. Nothing's permanent. All right, so let's kind of go back and look at the 8 steps again. All right, so this is a fairly simple book. If you want to get it, it's, I don't know, less than 20 bucks on this book. It's less than 20 bucks on Amazon, I think. But it's a nice sort of quick review, although basically the fundamentals are here in the slide. Right, so again, step 1, establish a sense of urgency. So when Lynchburg College became University of Lynchburg, I was having lunch with President Guerin of the college, of the university now, right? And I said, you know, I teach organizational change, and from me to you, there's a couple things you really should think about. One, you got to convince people there's a need to change the college, change the name from college to university, right? You got to state that over and over again, right? And you got to communicate that need, right? You can't do it enough. Don't assume telling people once, twice, thrice is enough. You got to keep going and tell people over and over again why we need to make this change, why it's important to the success of the organization, right? Over and over and over again. So if we look at these again, the first step is the most common one skipped, establishing a sense of urgency, and then it's creative guiding coalition, developing a vision. So creative guiding coalition. So here's the team. What does the team do? They come up with a vision for solving the problem from step 1. Right. When they get that vision, number 4, they're going to communicate the change vision to everybody. So this is where we're going to go. This is how we're going to get there. Then we're going to need help. Number 5 is we start getting people to help us. And number 6 is when those helpers start having successes, we give them short-term tasks to do. They start having successes. We reward them, make those rewards visible, so the rest of the people in the organization realize, oh, this new thing gets rewarded. Maybe I should jump in on that. Right. And number 7, we're going to consolidate gains, producing more change, right? And then number 8, we make the new way the way, right? So I guess I have an example when I saw this work when my company, when I was making cell phones, moved the MRP system over to SAP, the big German software system. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that. It's this huge software system that does accounting, resource handling, enterprise resource planning, and all that. But I asked my boss, why are we going through this effort to adopt MRP? He had been in all these planning meetings. He knew all the background data. So I said, why are we doing this? And he looked at me and he said, isn't it obvious? And then he started talking about something else. So he completely skipped step 1 with me. So as a engineering manager, I was never motivated to send good people to help or whatever, because I really had no feeling like it was necessary to the organization to adopt this. I still think it is, by the way. I still don't agree with their logic, but that's a different issue. So I guess now I ask you guys about your experiences. What do you think of this list? What do you think about Kotter's list here? You think it's the right list? You think it's too long? Anything missing? You support the idea? What do you think?
I love the sense of urgency and bold and first. You know, a lot of people don't see that. So it's a good sort of gut check of like, is it even needed right now?
Yeah, I'm not interested in the answer if I don't know the problem, right? You got to get me to think about the problem, recognize it as a problem. Then I'm interested in finding an answer. Presenting me to an answer to something that I don't think is a problem really doesn't work very well, right? Okay. Anybody else?
I think that generating short-term wins, and that'll get people's buy-in. If they'll see things are working gradually, then the long-term outcome will be good. But I think it's important that we actually do recognize those short-term wins.
Yeah. As a project manager, I used to have short-term goals at the beginning of the project, short-term milestones to get people moving. And then when they met those milestones, they got rewarded. And if they didn't meet those milestones, it got a little uncomfortable, right? So everybody got the idea they had to deliver their deliverables on time, right? And it got things set off on the right foot, I think. Okay. Anybody else? Anybody have much experience with this? Success or failures?
Yeah, I mean, sorry. I was just going to say that I spent my whole career managing change, and the first thing that the group, once you get the group empowered and together and talking about what needs to be done, the first thing that it's easy to, I've never had any problem establishing a sense of urgency. That seems to be everybody's desire to buy into that and understand that, but finding that short-term win and getting it accomplished and recognized and done first is there seems to be a motivation in the team almost always to go to the hardest thing first instead of the short-term win first. So I think I like this list, and it was a part of the article that I reviewed too. So
good. All right. Yeah, this list shows up a lot in the literature that we're going to talk about. Yeah, that we're going to look at. Yep. Anything else?
Well, healthcare is quite complicated, Robson here, and I think that it's anchoring these new ideas as we're emerging the information we're gleaning in this program and also out kind of in our work, is that we have to apply it to the culture of the people we're speaking to, and we have to have trusted lines of communication and kind of create some positive influences. So it's been kind of neat to see what number 8 does. Big picture. And I think brokers, we sometimes forget to speak more to the problem than to the solutions we have in our pockets.
Yes. It's human nature to jump to the solution, right? We got to frame the problem first. It's just human nature. You get excited about the solution and you forget to tell them what the problem is you're trying to fix. So the result is people say, why do I need to do that? Well, they don't need to do that because you haven't framed the problem for them, right? So absolutely, that's part of setting it up for the win is taking that thought to build your case to construct the problem, and then you show them the solution to the problem. Right. Absolutely. By the way, when I teach this, many years ago, I was sitting up late, I don't know, with a sick kid or something, watching these late night scam shows. They try to get you invest in flipping houses and that kind of stuff. Used to be on late night cable, right? Well, this is exactly what they do. They don't come to you and say, hey, we have a solution, send me $500 and I'll teach you how to make $1 million, right? First, they spend the first 10, 15 minutes of the hour convincing you, wouldn't it be nice if you had more money so you could treat not because you're greedy, because you could treat your family to nice things, right? And then they bring out some nice looking guy who said, yeah, I've been married for 40 years. I wanted to take my wife to a big cruise. I didn't have enough money, blah, blah, blah. But then I invested in this new, whatever, flipping houses, no money down. Now I have plenty of money to treat my family like I want to treat them, and they all love me more for it, right? I mean, so they spend the first 10 minutes of the commercial not telling you why you need to send them your money. They send it, you have a problem you didn't even know about. You can't take your family on a world cruise and treat them with love and whatever they deserve, and they kind of get you this itch that you need more stuff. Then they show the solution to your problem, not having enough money, right? They're pretty good at this, by the way. That's how they make their living. Right? But it's a little like that. You have to establish this sense of urgency. Just showing up and say, hey, I have this thing that's better. And like, I wasn't even looking for better, so I'm not really interested. You have to convince them that where they are now, it's not it's a burning platform, right? Right. It's not in good shape now, and it's going to get worse. And I think you guys get an easy argument for that in the line of work you're talking about with healthcare benefits and rising costs and all that. I think you guys got one of the easiest arguments to make, but you can convince them that, yeah, the platform's on fire. Even if it's holding you up now, it's not going to hold you up in the future. And you need to move. Now let's talk about where you're moving to, right? Because this is not sustainable.
Lee, it's easy to say that it looks bad and the prices are going up, but it is really hard to convince people that there is another answer that isn't insane.
Okay, gotcha.
You know, I spent a long time trying to figure out the details before I even was introduced to this course because I got inklings that there were ways to fix this problem. Now I'm in the position of trying to convince my HR director and my controller. They're convinced that the current situation is on fire and we have to do something. But they're extremely nervous about all of the components that have to go into this healthcare solution.
They should be nervous, right? It's very complex. It's very tricky, right? And it's a very big deal. It's your employees' family safety, right? That's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I'm worried about the safety of my family almost above everything else. Absolutely. I would suggest, go ahead.
Sorry, Lee, I was going to say it sort of reminds me of the analogy of the frog and the boiling pot of water.
Yeah.
You know, they've inched up, and they just keep taking it until, it's insane.
It becomes a point like, oh, here we go again, another 20% or whatever, right? I agree.
Well, they're brainwashed that there's nothing you can do about it.
Right.
We've been told that for a long time, and most people just think that's the truth. And when you tell them, yeah, there is something that you can do about it, it's hard to get them to see that it's possible, and they get terrified not to have an insurance company involved. What do you mean there's no network?
Yeah.
How does that work?
Yeah. How does that work? Right. How does that work? One of the solutions that might help is the guiding coalition, right? So this is a very complex issue, and you're not going to be able to explain it, all the details to everybody. It's probably not going to work the way. So what you need to get is representatives from the different groups in there. So that representative, I was in the room. I heard all this stuff, and believe me, it's complicated, but I think it's going to work. I think I heard about it, and how you find those right people, you have to find like the informal leaders from the hourly people, the opinion makers, the informal, the people who set the mood out there, right? And so you really do have to work hard to get the right people in the room, and that's a very tricky process. Right? And some of those people aren't going to want to be in the room. They don't have the patience for it or whatever. So they may not be, just because they're a leader doesn't mean they're the right person to be in the room. But that's kind of the key issue to get buy-in. You need people there to witness all the arguments, all the logic, right, and follow it through. And then they can tell their colleagues, yeah, I know it sounds scary, but believe me, this is the best way. This is scary, but what we're doing now is even scarier. We just don't know it yet.
Lee, couldn't it work the opposite as well with the guiding coalition? People who you do want to be there, don't want to be there, but potentially people you don't want to be there do want to be there in the room, that potentially could derail your success.
Okay, good question. So Kotter, right? John Kotter, the author of this book, has done this for many, many years at a lot of companies, right? And he used to say, a lot of people will tell you, if you've got the naysayers, you bring them on board early so they can see the whole process and they buy in along the way and you win them over, right? Kotter's getting older, and apparently he's getting crankier because his attitude now is, you know what? Some people never do get on board. And if you bring them in the room, all they're going to do is cause damage. They're going to be the naysayers. They're going to bring up negative things. They're going to disrupt the conversations. They're going to cast doubt. They're going to say things that aren't true, right? And then you're going to say, hey, why don't you become part of this process? Why don't you do this for me? And he goes, they'll look you right now and go, sure, John, I'll do that for you. And then they won't, right? So his old cranky man attitude now is just keep them out of the room and just go around them, right? Get people who are more likely to come on board. And if they're hardcore, if their mind's made up, it's not worth your time trying to change their mind, and you almost for sure not be successful. Just leave them out of the picture. Just deal with the fallout of them backbiting you outside of the room, but don't let them in the room, because the people in the room have a lot of work to do. They got to figure this thing out. So it's really not worth it. It was kind of interesting to hear him say that, right? Because a lot of people had the whole bring everybody in the room kind of thing for a long time. His opinion is, nope, I've seen it too many times not work. It's not worth the effort. It's dangerous bringing them in the room. They could derail you before you ever get out of the room. I thought that was an interesting way to look at it. That's Cotter's opinion anyway, and he's done it, many dozens of times as a consultant to a lot of people.
I kind of like it, but how do you uninvite somebody?
What's that?
How do you uninvite somebody?
Oh, never invite them in the first place is the key.
Right, but if they invite themselves.
Oh, no. This is by invitation only, this group.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. It's going to have to be by invitation only, right? I think people who know what's going on out there, who know the informal power structure in the organization, are going to help pick this team. It's going to have to be kind of a hand-picked team.
Lee, I had a team that pulled together from all different areas of the organization.
Uh-huh.
It was half naysayers, and we worked for a year and got nothing done.
Okay.
You can't do it. Won't. The team that's leading it, the Champions for Change, have got to be people that want it, understand it, are willing to think about it and work on it.
Yeah, if they just shut down and won't even entertain the logic of why we might do this and how it might be better, then there's no winning that argument, right? Because you're trying to use logic and they're using emotion. No, I know, mine's made up. I'm not doing it. That's it, right? Sounds like Congress, I know, right? But that's the way it goes, right? So your logical arguments just have no effect because they're not being heard, right? They're not being heard. They're not being considered. So they're totally ineffective, right? So you either got to change it to an emotional argument or you got to get them out of the room. Just get them out of the room. An emotional argument might be,
Lee.
What are you going to say? Yeah.
Hey, Terry, you bring up a really good, interesting point. We've had some successes in bringing groups of people together to kind of work on an annual plan for healthcare going into next year. But we do come across some of those people. It's almost like you have to kind of give them a survey. And I don't know what the best questions are, but something short, quick, and easy to understand more of who they are. I shared with everybody this personality test, but it's like, if you know that these are the people's personalities, you can speak to that personality, because the change that you need to implement with healthcare takes a lot of work, from HR to CEOs to CFOs. Like, it's unbelievable. Sure. But by kind of a group of people together who is like the guys or gals on the line to executives and everybody in between, those are the decision makers. And it's, Terry, I really liked it because it's hard, but you need to figure out a way to get everybody together on the same page to move for those projects.
Yeah.
Lee, I just wanted to mention, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I just want to mention that I actually did my article also, and Cotter was in it. And in the 5th step of it, they were talking about how you had to focus on, 4 different obstacles. And, I thought it was interesting because one of the obstacles they talked about was the structure. And I wonder, from a broker standpoint, when we look at coming in as a broker, imagine Terry, who's been there forever, and they know her, like her, and trust her. They feel confident in her. You bring a broker in, the first step that he talks about is the structure, and saying, hey, you have to overcome that organizational structure. Maybe sometimes, and he talks about how breaking down that structure is so important so that they can really see that it's not about them as much as it is about the problem. And I think that organizationally, maybe that's where, like in Terry's situation, like she sees the light, but the structure itself is still in place so that they're not seeing it.
I agree. And that's part of, I think if you establish that sense of urgency, right, then you at least get them to start looking. We need to look for a new solution somewhere, right? And that's where you have to come up by. But like Terry said, a lot of people are just sort of immune to this. They got the idea, it is what it is, and it's going to go up so much every year, and there's nothing that can be done, and they sort of convince that, right? So part of the issue is convincing them people are doing some things, and maybe you just have to go get some information on what other people, how other people are improving this, how other people are doing better at this, and show some data that just to get the ball rolling. Say there is hope, right? We do have a chance to go better, and we just can't keep going down this path. Right. But I get this is a very touchy subject for a lot of places. It's going to be difficult to make this, get people to take the risk. So you basically have to convince them the risk is more, change is risky, but not change is even more risky, right? So did I tell the story last week? When I made cell phones for a living, we had consultants come in there and analyze our business from a management standpoint. And every 6 to 9 months, we launched a new cell phone in our factory. So a cell phone ran about 18 months, but we had multiple cell phones going. So about every 6 months, we ran 3 different cell phones, and we had a new cell phone coming out every 3 months. And so this management consultant who'd been around a lot said, I was talking to him and I said, hey, look, the team wants to know when you're going to be ready with your suggestions for our business because we want to improve the business. And he said, well, you know, it usually takes a couple months, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, look, we might not have a couple months, man. Let's go. We're looking for your suggestions pretty fast here. And he said, okay, stop right there. Let me ask you this. Every organization I talk to, every other organization I talk to, when we come in suggesting change, I get foot dragging, I get excuses, I get reasons we can't do that. You guys come to my door and you're kicking my door in saying, hey, where's your changes? We want them faster, right? You guys are the only people I've ever met giving me a hard time about not being fast enough with my change, as opposed to the other way around, they want to avoid them. I said, all right, let me tell you how it works in the cell phone business, right? We know every time we launch a new cell phone in our factory, it's risky. That phone could have serious problems, right? It could have a quality problem, software problem. It could blow up in our face, and now we're without a product. I get that. We all understand there's a risk, right? So there's a certain amount of risk every time we change product from one major product line to the next. It's just like when the car guys change their cars over, they could introduce a bunch of quality problems or whatever. We get that. We accept that risk. But that's a risk we can control. On the other hand, if we don't launch a new cell phone in our factory and we keep making the same cell phones, what's the risk we're going to be in trouble 2 or 3 years out? Say 3 years into the future.
Yeah,
about 100%, right? Almost for sure, right? Will we be in big, big trouble if we don't change cell phone lines for 3 years, right? So even though change is risky, not change is almost for sure fatal, right? So, and I said, everybody here understands that because we talk about that over the time, all the time when we talk about making changes. So therefore, we want change because staying where we are is fatal, and we know that. So change is risky, staying where we are is worse. And I think maybe that's the kind of argument you might try. You have to show that staying on the path they're on is fatal, and going to the new path is, though it's risky, has a good chance of succeeding. Right? Sort of pick your poison, maybe.
But what's interesting is that we, from the decision-making aspect side of it, is that the HR folks are trying to keep their job year over year. If the company was its own organism, I think the organism would understand how important this healthcare review and change should be.
Okay.
But when you have these small parts of the puzzle whose job security is tied to it, the risk reward, if I do find savings, do I get that applied to my department? Yes, no, who knows? Like, there's so many other things that are underlying in change that we're seeing on multiple levels. It gets more complex, but you know, it's why I really appreciated this 4 obstacles, because we got to speak to that more often than not than anything about health insurance.
And that's one of the reasons. Where was the one? Clearing picture too soon, not anchoring in. We talked about organizational. The 4th bullet: organizational metrics that focus on 2 narrowable goals. Right. And that's not the HR person's fault. They're getting measured to do something for HR, not save the whole company or do a big swap in benefits or whatever. So I get why that is, you know, it's difficult to make it happen from that level. I get it. You got to get the attention of people bigger up who see a bigger picture, who have access to a bigger set of numbers and all of that to get them interested in this, because this is such a big change in the business, right? It's maybe they can start getting people interested with the right information out of HR, but it's going to require a lot more horsepower than that to make this kind of change. That's for sure. We can walk through some of these other reasons for failure. Certainly, 78% organizations fail to meet expectations. Like, there's no sense of urgency, no guiding mission, no vision, and so forth. Error number 2, not a powerful enough coalition. There you go. If your coalition is full of but it's full of HR people, there's no CFO on board, things like that, or at least their representative, they're going to have a hard time making it stick. Once we get the right people in the room, then we got to come out of there with a vision. No vision, no action, right? We don't know where we're going. Or if we do have a vision, number 4, we under-communicate the vision. We tell people once and we think everybody's got the message and they take it internally to heart, when that's not true at all. You got to keep telling people over and over again. It's like how many times you've been told to recycle or brush your teeth or whatever, right? Right. You got to repeat messages over and over and over again until they sink in. Often the organization has obstacles to the vision that need to be removed, and we got to have enough power in the organization to make that happen. Often people will forget short-term wins. Look at this, success in 30 days. Right? We need to have a success in 30 days of this program, and it can often take 12 months to build momentum for a 2 or 3 year change. Right? So many big organizations happen with over a 2 or 3 year time frame. It's not something you can do in 6 months. It takes longer for that, the processes to settle in, the people to change their regular behaviors, people get used to the idea. It takes a while to make a major organizational change. Or number 7, we just take our foot off the gas too early. We declare victory too soon. We just want this extra effort to go away, and we don't focus on the problems we have. And then number 8 is we forget to make to anchor the change. We show the new ways better. What we need to do is institutionalize this, change our rules, change our processes, all of that, to make it part of the normal way in which we work. Right. So those are kind of the antecedents to the actual changes that Kotter talks about. So I would recommend his books. He has a number of videos out too. You're sitting around an airport, you're in your car commuting, that kind of stuff, right? So John Kotter's his name. I would recommend looking this up. He has a lot of talks about this. He does also things in strategy, but he just has a lot of experience in helping, I will say with the caveat, he's a large corporation kind of guy. He doesn't go into a lot of small businesses, so he talks a lot about corporation changes, which is generally pretty difficult. But once you get the ball rolling, it tends to keep rolling. So I would say, well, not always, I guess. But anyway, he talks mostly about the corporate world, maybe not what I would call the medium-sized companies, the 50 to 200 employee type companies, which some you may or may not be talking to. But I like it because it's 8's a lot of steps, but it's not too many. You can still get your head around it and focus in on what's going on. So this is a fairly clear plan on what needs to happen. By the way, I alluded to the change from Lynchburg College, University of Lynchburg. As an organizational change, that's not a big deal. We changed the name of the organization, but how we work inside that organization really didn't change hardly at all. So it wasn't as big a deal as a lot of people thought it was going to be. It's just a labeling kind of issue, right? Although some people, and particularly some alumni, got their nose out of joint a little bit over, but it's kind of going away by now. This would be a much bigger deal. All right. Any more questions, comments? All right. Okay. I thought now we talk about your articles. We touched on them a little bit. Alicia told about her article. Since she volunteered anyway, Alicia, why don't you tell us about your article first? We will. Let me get out of stop share here. All right. So the idea was to just kind of talk about your article for about 5 minutes. Tell us what was going on in the article and what you thought of it, and kind of any takeaways you have from it.
Okay. So my article was entitled, "How Can Collective Leadership Influence the Implementation of Change in Healthcare?" It was a really interesting article. It was actually out of a Chinese nursing program. And basically what it was a study. And it was a study, and they actually did use Kotter as their main methodology. So what they did was they went through and evaluated the lessons they learned from Kotter's and applying what they called a collective leadership model. And what they considered the collective leadership model was not looking at management as different layers of, high tier, medium tier, and low tier, but more of a collective type of group of people that got together on common knowledge-based issues and work together in that group. So what they found out was during this analysis was that a collective leadership style could influence the implementation of organizational change because of the method of management would allow for exactly what Kotter lays out in terms of keeping data, everyone being in the same mindset to evaluate that data. What they really were trying to figure out was it going to, in this situation for healthcare, would it be beneficial for this method to be implemented to have safe medical services for patients? Because when you have different people at different levels, sometimes they don't see eye to eye. So when they implemented the 8-step process for Kotter, they found, which I thought was great, what they found was that they could share healthcare information on one level. they can give timely feedback to themselves, and they could really have the staff relate to it. So what I did in my paper was I broke down all the different levels of the change model, and I abbreviated what I learned from that. And I said the first lesson that I learned from this study is that managerial change always has some type of model to follow. And that is the first thing you talk about with creating urgency, was that they came out of the study and said, look, we are going to have to get this done. This is something we just can't keep messing around with. Patient safety is so important. So they made it urgent, which is why they used the Kotter. They said managing change is a complex, dynamic, challenging process. And in order for us to execute that change, we need to have a better framework for thinking about change and understanding the key issues. So they laid out the key issues that were, cleanliness, organization, patient care, emergency situations. They said, we just cannot throw ideas against the wall and have them stick. We need to have a well laid out plan. So as I went through that, I thought it was pretty interesting that they really wanted to engage all levels of staff in the implementation of this change. But it was interesting because in step 2, they were talking about if the organization creates an understanding of caring, respect, and trusting in the culture, it's easier to perform. So even though it was such an urgent situation, they were able to sit down with the staff and say, look, we all want to do this because we care about our patients. We're not doing this to make people upset. We're not trying to make, we care about their actual safety. And with the right people, with trust as being a common goal, even though it's difficult, we can achieve this. So it was really a cool article because they talked about, having a strong, healthy company, make healthcare changes that were practical, but for the better good.
Okay.
On the third step of the article, they want to talk about the common vision. And that was really difficult, I guess, when I was reading this paper, they were talking about how, what you believe, what one level of staff believes to be patient care, another level of staff may not feel the same thing, especially when you're in billing. So that's something they focus on a lot in step 3, having that common vision. They talked about how they needed to have clear, feasible strategies that should give us a clear organizational structure. So don't look at each other as competition. We're all doing the same thing. Our vision is clear. Patient safety is the number one aspect. So they got everyone to get together on that, on the change vision. And what I learned from that was the law of numbers really rule. The more people we can convince to be part of the organizational change, the easier it's going to be. And that's what Kotter talks about. And so what they did was they didn't just take the higher management and delegate down. They were actually able to say, look, we all need to be part of this. The law of numbers will prevail. The more people we have involved, the more people that are on our side, the other people are just going to follow. And that was part of the structure. So they talked about the 4 barriers or obstacles that need to be overcome. The first was structural, second was skills, third was systems, and the fourth was supervisors. I thought it was interesting that they listed supervisors last. And as I read the paper, I realized why they did that, because they said the approach states that in order for change to occur, we must overcome the structural barrier first. So regardless of what the supervisors want, they're still just supervisors. Mm-hmm. We have to make sure that the whole entire structure is affected first, and then delegate it down to the supervisors, who then tell their staff, hey, we're all in this together. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was pretty interesting. It was definitely different than I expected.
Okay.
I'll step down to step 6. I felt that was the most impressive step for me. What that is that the change model, in that change model, the goal is to generate short-term wins. So they didn't say, hey, in 3 years, we want to do this. They said in 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. In 3 weeks, we want cleaner beds. We want, and they're in China, so their population is bigger than us. But that's why I thought this was a great article, because they took this massive hospital that had an amazing number of 4 to 5 patients per room and said, in 3 weeks, we want to be able to come through here and make sure everything is clean, everything is orderly, everything is organized. And from the file room to the billing room to the rooms. That was amazing. And they achieved that by having the short-term wins that Kotter discussed.
Good.
And I guess lastly, to round this out, they talked about organizational growth. They said, when we think about organizational growth, we fail to remember that healthcare organizations need a strong leadership culture that consolidates gains and produces more change for future medical service. So at the end of the day, it's always changing. every day will change. Every day things will be in our way, but we have to remember that with an organization to have a strong leadership culture, if the leaders lead correctly, then the organizational structure should hopefully work.
Yeah. So do you think the fact that it was in China had a big influence on things, or really not, that these 8 steps worked in China just as well as they might in the US?
I think they would work anywhere. I just like the fact that, we are very, I guess, quote unquote, spoiled in the United States. We have either single rooms or double rooms. We don't have 4, 5, 6 people in a room being treated. But even the number of staff that they have, in our hospital system, if they have 300 to 400 staff and they're having, 3,000, it's insane the number of people that they are working with in the masses. So I do believe it would work in a small organization as well as a large one. But I was intrigued that they could make these short-term results happen through this methodology on such a large scale.
Wow. That's a lot of people to get doing stuff in 3 weeks. Yeah. All right. Interesting. Well, that's good. Your paper fed great into that last presentation. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed it.
Good. All right. So Rob's struggling with the weather. Rob's struggling with the weather in Houston a little bit. You texted me.
Yeah, if you like rain, we have some, and if you like lots of rain, we have some of that, and if you like even more rain, we're going to be getting that. So it's kind of fun to try to prepare for a little bit of that with some flooding around and a bunch of employees. 5 out of 4 rooms are being renovated because one's a great room. It's a nightmare and a new baby. So I just apologize. I'm having to maybe step out if it gets a little crazy here, but I don't know how y'all faced it, but I really enjoyed trying to find a quality organizational change article based in the American healthcare system. And I kept having difficulty finding something that I thought was extremely valuable after, an hour worth of searching. And I resulted into this, came from the University of Liverpool International Conference of Engineering Design. And it was this idea for Health 4.0. I believe through the Health Rosetta, a lot of advisors and folks across the country, there's this idea that we have of what this utopian future looks like. But they had a pretty fair perspective of 3 real big pillars of Health 4.0, and that's people, technology, and design. You need the people to interact with the technologies, and it all has to be architectural and quite cohesive. But what they were speaking to in the British model wasn't so much of the limitations, but just more of this future state. And I appreciated it because, again, we have to create a mindset where we as individuals are going home and asking Alexa to put groceries on a list, to have Instacart deliver them within a window of time, all autonomously of sorts. And so they kind of were referencing the healthcare experience that a patient goes through, is that there's the current model is kind of like this piece of tape, because you need blue tape when you're doing a bunch of painting, and that each little independent service was being offered: surgeries, MRIs, clinical reviews, hospitalization, all these little different pieces. And it feels like the patient is in the middle, but all they are is just a hub to a very fast moving spoke. And they realized that instead it kind of needed to be laid flat, and that the center needed to still be the patient, but they needed to be able to have everybody kind of focused in and down on to the patient so that the patient had the technology. They did kind of speak to a little bit of the electronic management resources that they have, which are okay or good. But then again, speaking to the limitations that the current model has and the complexities and competition with some of like a Siemens or a Samsung and Apple and these high-tech companies coming in and trying to battle for that kind of system of record for technology. And we see it again in our daily lives. But I think what I've been kind of amazed with in the last 6 to 8 months as I've explored it is the amount of sensors that exist in these high-tech medical fields, of being able to know if you could be able to bring a sensor that understood that could, for example, measure your urine at a hospital, and that data could be then sent out back to the hub to understand where your readings would be in the hospital settings, or matter of fact, at a home setting. We're seeing the Apple Watch being quite dynamic. So I really appreciated that on the Health 4.0 into the technology piece. But the biggest piece, again, is design. Design is where we have a $3 trillion industry that doesn't like change. And on the backside of all of their fancy technology are a bunch of fat fingers and people and humans making human decisions, human changes, human problems, human interference. And while we have this idea that it's going to be seamless and all our technologies are going to connect, we don't really have a good electronic management of records. We have a competing interest through 3 or 4 different systems out there. So it was kind of neat to see from a governmental country perspective that if they could get their minds around it and focus towards that more utopian future. It may not work here in America because we have some limitations about data privacy, free market capitalism, and some competing interests. But I can see that if the people want the solutions and the technology providers can build them, the architect who's going to put it all together through Medicare, government plans, or through employer health plans, that doesn't make it more expensive, but literally that has the opportunity to drive down prices and improve the outcomes. I think we're all for it, but we don't want to get into too much of a technical age to know that we are in a subscription model or have too many reliance on technologies that are expensive. So it was pretty interesting. But again, it was very, very hard to find an American perspective on organizational change in healthcare when it came to employee benefits. Hospital systems, there's some of that there, but I don't know about y'all, but I'm trying to figure out how to make employers smart. So I appreciate it, y'all. Thank you.
All right. Who'd like to go next?
I'll go.
Okay.
I agree with Rob. I looked for a long time to try to find something that was relevant to the change that we are going to have to, that all of us are interested in forwarding. And the closest I could find was something like he said in a hospital setting, and kind of like Alicia's group where it was in the healthcare field, but it wasn't at all speaking to what we're looking at, which is moving a group from fully insured to self-insured with a value-driven model. And so I finally gave up on that and chose an article from SHRM that was on basic management organizational change. And it went through the Cotter method and had a few differences from what we've learned tonight, but basically was the same lessons. And I thought that was a good method. They also had a second method that was like a 4-step method that was interesting too. Basically defining the roles and what was changing and why, establishing timeframes and clarifying success measures was the first section. And then the second section was planning, which was conducting an assessment to determine where you're starting, which is one thing that I think for us and what we're trying to do is absolutely critical to determine where the organization is, where the people are in their thought processes, and what they know and what they're ready to learn. And then under the planning step, you also were supposed to create the change plans and identify the risks and design plans for communicating and training. And in my view, it's that communicating and training piece that everybody on my management team is concerned about because they don't have time to implement that. And I keep thinking that as purveyors of this solution, if we could find a way not only to lay out how it's all going to work for the C-suite people that we're trying to convince to do this, but to give them the services that they need to get it done with as little involvement as possible, then we probably have a winning solution. And I don't know exactly how to do that, but it's something that I'm thinking about. Then the third step was the implementation, where you enable the leaders and you roll out the communications and the training, and you monitor and manage resistance and deploy the risk mitigation steps. And then the fourth section was the sustaining section, where you monitor how the changes are being adopted. You reinforce the behaviors that are aligned with your goals, and you measure these impacts of the changes, and then of course adjust the systems and communications based on metrics to continue to ratchet toward new successes and improved performance. And it was a really good article. I found value in looking at it and studying it. It had a lot of things in it that didn't apply, like what do you do when a company is merged with another company, or bankruptcy, or general business change principles that aren't relevant to what we're trying to solve here. But I thought it was a good article. It was worth reading, and it led me to the conclusion that somebody needs to write an article on this kind of change that we're challenged with here. And then I started reading today's homework, the Dave Chase article.
Yeah.
I didn't get through it all. I decided to print out all seven of his blogs, and I started at the beginning, and I didn't get through the whole thing, but I could see that he's going to probably address that kind of.
Yeah, he has a lot of overlaps with Kotter, and then how you apply that to benefits. Although a couple things are different, and that's okay too. But talks a little more about that. Okay, all right, good. Who else wants to go next?
I can go next.
Go ahead.
Oh, Joe, go ahead, Joe.
Okay, thank you. My article was on taking a hospital from a functional organization to a patient-centered approach. And what they, sorry, my dog's bothering me here. He wants pet. He won't leave me alone. What I did learn from it is that looking at the way the hospitals are set up, they talk about, switching it from just the standard functional model to a more process-oriented model, taking the specialty out of people and making them multi-specialty, so giving people more specialties instead of people being so specialized. Some of the other things was shifting nurses from task-oriented jobs to let's see here, to making them I lost my page here, to a multi, putting them in groups and making them work together. And then let's see what else I was looking at. They also, when they analyzed all the data, what they did was my article was from Italy, so they had a lot of access to the discharge charts. And they looked at 25 major diagnostic categories. So that would probably be like heart attacks, strokes, cancers, and things like that. And they analyzed the data from 86 hospitals over 9 years. And what they did was they found that the average age of a patient was 51.7 years old. 48% of them were male, and they had about 522 discharges per year. My article was real math driven, so there was a lot of mathematics involved in it. And then one other thing that they did look at, they looked at mortality rates, and none of that changed in their data from shifting to this patient-centered model. And I think when they switched to the patient-centered model, they were looking at more efficient ways to run the hospital and effective ways to run the hospital. So when they would switch they were going to more like a care-based atmosphere, than say maybe working on trying how to solve mortality. And I think that's, where taking this kind of a model and putting it down into a primary care model, that I think you would find you would be able to help with mortality rates because you would be able to get people healthier at an earlier age to then, then they wouldn't end up in the hospital with these 25 major diagnostic categories. Did talk too about, having technology, policymakers and healthcare managers take responsibility and start implementing things to help. And I think that a lot of technology companies are helping. Telemedicine has come a long way, where they used to use it in a more rural areas where it was hard to get to the doctors, so you would use telemedicine. Now they're using the telemedicine, to in cities where it's a better convenience to do telemedicine appointment than sitting in the doctor's waiting room. Salesforce is a software company that was primarily designed for salespeople, but they're making great headways into the healthcare market, and they're designing softwares that, hold on one second. Man, my dog really threw me for a loop here.
Don't tell me you ate your homework, Joe.
Yeah, I know, it's close to it. But Salesforce, what they're doing is making softwares to help reduce readmission rates, connecting patients with care teams, looking at post-acute care experience. And what they're doing is putting everything out in a cloud. So if I was, say, admitted to a hospital, say somewhere outside my network, then everybody would have access to it. So they would have, more access to the data. So that would speed up my process of getting care. And then I think that, policymakers are making some headway, even though I'm not for government, say, getting into our lives. But I think like the HITECH Act, by coming up with that, maybe pushed, say, Salesforce to, start coming up with softwares, because they could see the amount of money that the government's putting out there for these hospitals to use, so things like that. But that was pretty much everything about the article, just showing that, changes in the organization could help patients become healthier.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a big on quantitative analysis there, huh? Quantitative
Yes.
analysis, yeah.
Yes.
And proving this works, that works, all that, right?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, the good thing about it is now that there's data out there, so other people can take that data and build upon it.
Yeah, that's good. By the way, my stats book says Florence Nightingale was one of the first ones that used applied statistics to show that hospitals that use the military methods of cleanliness with patients saved lives and better outcomes and so forth, right? So she gets credit for not only implementing a lot of things with nurses, but for actually bringing in statistical analysis into the business side of things and showing that it really works. Till then, all these surgeons were just looking down her nose. She's just a nurse. What can she possibly know? And she sort of, when in doubt, crush them with data, right? So that's exactly what she did. Okay, who'd like to go next? Ryan, you want to go next?
Sure. I'm kind of like the others, where I looked through the articles and I got about the 20th one, and I finally decided I'm just going to go with a foreign story. But it was kind of nice. It was actually written by an Australian doctor who is now kind of in charge of the different hospitals. And it was cool because he actually addressed the fact that, so basically in Australia, they have a dual system where it's public and it's private. And then they can do, unlike us, where if you have the employer, you can't go on the exchange. Over there, you actually can. You have the choice. If it's kind of like buying up, if you want to get the, private care. So it's just a little bit, it's a different way, but he did allude to a few times about studies that were done here and how minimal they are. But he did so anyway, he did kind of talk a little bit about that. But the kind of like the premise or the main point is that when he started off, he was saying, 50 to 60% of medical care has not been properly delivered. A third of medicine is not even been shown to be useful. 1 in 10 patients are victims of adverse health care. And so he introduced this thing called complexity science, and it's just kind of a way to look at a way to solve problems within the medical industry. And it was kind of pessimistic, but he did get a little bit more positive at the end. But he started off just by saying that, changing the way it's been done over the last century is extremely difficult. It's the most complex industry in the entire world. There's thousands of businesses within the healthcare industry. Unlike other industries, history doesn't help us learn about the future like other industries because of technology and other things that happen in the medical field. He said pretty much stakeholders dictate how and when changes are enacted, and hidden transactions and negotiations, as we all know, happen every day. And so it's really hard to even begin the process of trying to change things. However, he did get a little bit into, the hows and what has been proven to work a little bit over the years. And then he kind of elaborates at the end. So he starts off when it does. He's saying that medical progress does make change happen because it directly involves the doctors. It does not happen when it's mandated from the top down. Basically, people don't care about it, they're not going to implement it. He's saying that basically the doctors, nurses, everybody on the customer-facing level, they have the opportunity to fix things within at least the hospital, medical system. If anything is delivered, if they're given, mandated, you have to do it this way, and policy and regulation, basically it's not being implemented. And the problem is that nobody's checking up to find out if it's even being implemented. They come up with all these elaborate plans of how we're going to fix things, and then it's kind of just left by the wayside because they're moving on to the next thing 3 months later. He calls it hardware changes, which is basically the macro level where, again, it starts in the ivory tower and it starts at the top and trickles its way down. He says that absolutely does not work. He was saying that the software changes is where it works, and that is culture and organizational changes that are implemented by the people who are actually affected by them. If you can get their buy-in, they will make it happen. If not, it's a lost cause and it's a waste of time. And again, this is coming from a physician who he has seen it at the ground level, and now he's kind of worked his way, not up, but just into different positions. And he sees that it's not being done when it's ordered. More so, it's when the executives or whatever come down and actually have discussions with the people on the ground floor, and then he's seen change happen. So again, another one, he said that location does not dictate success in another demographic. And what he means by that is just because something in San Francisco may work does not mean that it's going to work in New York City. You have to, this is not a change where it's going to come from the top and, okay, so everybody's going to listen to it. Again, everybody has different things going on, different culture, different way of running the business. So it has to be done more so individually, as far as San Francisco, again, it may not work across the country, but that doesn't mean not to try the ideas. It just means don't try and replicate it.
Gotcha.
Culture and organization. Yes. Okay. So basically, he said that technology changes. He said technology is great, but unfortunately it's not, because it changes so quickly, it's not enough to be the end all be all reason. Again, you can take some of the technological changes that are helping patients and helping the doctors do their job, but within 6 months, it's going to change. Just like we were talking about earlier, the cell phones, they have to. It's unfortunately, it's just part of it. So don't try and take, again, it's working so well here. Oh my gosh, by the time you actually implement it with your people, it's probably going to be outdated. So just try and take the idea, not necessarily the actual technological piece.
Gotcha.
And he concluded just by saying, again, there's 6 pieces to this complexity science. Bureaucrats will not save the system by implementing policies. It will not work. It's been proven it does not work. You can't just tell people what to do and expect it to be, especially in this industry, for it to work the way that it's written down on paper. Doctors and those on the ground level will make it more successful. That's number 2.
Number 3, acknowledge that clinicians do more good than harm. There's a lot of, like he talked about earlier, 1 in 10 patients are victims of adverse health care. And a lot of people talk about that. Well, don't forget, he says, that 9 out of 10 are not. So number 4, we need to look internationally at all success stories, not just our own country. I guess there's a book out there he was talking about that had a success story of like 65 different countries who had done little pieces of it. We all get so caught up in our own way of doing things, and we're so one-sided. We don't want to reach out and realize that, hey, maybe something in Brazil might actually work in the United States. So don't just stick here. So obviously, it's not working here the way we want it to, so maybe it's time we look outside. Number 5, one day at a time, be patient and humble. This thing is not going to be fixed overnight, no matter how optimistic you are. And finally, if we really want to change the system, individuals can do it. It doesn't need to be done by groups of executives. Individuals can make this happen, but it needs to be collaborative, and everybody needs to be on the same page. So that's kind of all that good stuff. It's hard for me to agree or disagree. I did the best I could in my paper. I'm not in the hospitals, and I'm not at the private practices. I don't know. I was, more looking maybe from you to shed some light on just not just this industry, but just in general. I mean, what he said to me, it sounds like it makes sense, but again, I have no idea how to. That was the hardest part of this paper for me, was kind of agree or disagree, just because my lack of experience in this.
Gotcha. But it sounds like he's very much agreeing with what Cotter was saying with the 8 change steps. And I used to, you said it just can't be a dictate from the top, right? I used to call that change by royal decree, right?
Yeah.
Whoever's at the top, the monarch says, thou shalt, this shall be the case. And then it is until he's not looking, and then it isn't, right?
That's right.
So people really got to believe in the change and think it's going to be to their advantage, or it's really, even if you can make it happen, it's not going to stick. First time they get distracted or don't pay attention, people will start finding ways to subvert it, right? So, so interesting. So a third of the procedure is not helpful is what they said. I wrote that down.
What he said was 1/3 of medicine. I'm not sure if he was talking more prescription or if he's talking actual. I had heard a stat before in another book I read that they were talking about a third of prescriptions do not actually do like cancer and stuff, don't actually fix the problem. They just kind of put a Band-Aid on it. So yeah, that might have been, I would like to kind of, I had a few questions I wish I could ask this person.
Yeah, right.
Are you talking about Dave?
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Yeah, I think that was.
We'll have Dave on if you like.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
We're not about the Dave tip. Everybody did an article and brought it tonight, right? So we're just talking. They're reviewing their articles with us.
Spectacular. Okay.
What's going
But
on?
I think Dave Chase was the one who said the 1/3 thing. That's exactly right.
Was that he's the one? Yeah.
I think so.
Like
yeah.
I think I read.
There are a lot of so it's interesting. 30% of cancers are misdiagnosed. I think we've talked about that.
Yeah.
And what Tom Emmerich found, of course, with the Walmart Centers of Excellence is that, and this is over 7 years, having people, whoever had to have a spinal fusion, open heart surgery, joint replacement, anything serious, they were flown free with their spouse to one of the Centers of Excellence, a Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic or wherever their Centers of Excellence are. And over 7 years, 50% of the procedures were unnecessary, 50%, and 60% plus for spine. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the 1/3 referred to, but I'm sure you can get to at least that.
At least that number, yeah.
Yeah. So.
All right.
And there are some pretty impressive results from genome testing and the metabolizing of drugs and their effectiveness for individuals. And it seems that the more complicated or expensive these drugs are, the lower kind of effectiveness that they have. So there's some interesting numbers behind that too.
Okay. Who would like to review the article next? Anybody else ready to go?
Don't be shy.
Call out a name.
I guess I can go.
Sorry, Tom, you missed mine. Sorry, Tom, you missed mine. I'm sorry. He picked me first, of course, right?
Yeah.
I think you might have volunteered, Alicia. I don't know.
I was muted. I was saying I could go.
Okay, go ahead, Liz.
Okay. Can y'all still see me when I change my screen?
No.
No.
No. Do you see anything?
No.
Does it matter if you see me? Okay, because I didn't print my report, so I'm trying to use some notes here, but I'll switch back and forth. How about that?
Okay.
Okay, so my paper is on a theory of organizational readiness for change, which I thought was an interesting topic. I also had some difficulty finding something, went through a lot of articles. I thought maybe that was part of the method to your madness, was having us read a ton of stuff to land on one eventually. But this is a little bit older too than I had planned, but I think it still holds a lot of water today. So it talks about change management and an organization's readiness for change and how you come about that. So change management experts have emphasized the importance of establishing organizational readiness for change and recommended various strategies for creating it. So the author decided to write on this because he says there's been quite a lot studied and actually written about on individual readiness for change, but not so much on the organizational front. He calls it a multi-level, multifaceted construct. As an organizational level construct, readiness for change refers to organizational members' shared resolve to implement a change. He calls this change commitment, and shared belief in their collective ability to do so. He calls that change efficacy. So he talks about organizational readiness for change varies as a function of how much organizational members value the change and how favorably they appraise three key elements that determines the implementation capability. So task demands, resource availability, and thirdly, situational factors. So I did something kind of different, and I utilized those things and looked at it through the lens of the different people and groups, organizational groups really, that we're going to have to change the minds of. So that being employer groups, the employees themselves, providers, and brokers. And so I kind of looked at it how, utilizing this information, we could use this to get them to change. So he talks of it as a shared psychological state in which organizational members feel committed to implementing an organizational change and confident in their collective abilities to do so. So I kind of related that to employer groups, having this kind of thrown at them from a broker. They have to have the resources, and that's one of the resource availability is having a competent broker or advisor to be able to help take them through this change and help walk them through this change. And they can do that a number of different ways by providing data. I think both as far as where they have been as a group, kind of look at it, how the increased costs have risen, say, over the last 5 or 10 years, and projected into the future what it's going to look like if they don't make that change, to help make that sense of urgency. And then also by utilizing and maybe just walking with another advisor who has done this. That's kind of my intention in the future, to be able to show we're not the first people to do this, but we have data to show how it's actually been successful. So he talks about what is organizational. When you say organizational readiness for change, it's like you said, multi-level construct. It can be more or less present at the individual, group, unit, department, and organizational levels. And the term readiness itself connotes a state of being both psychologically and behaviorally ready to make a change, which basically means willing and able. And he emphasized shared resolve because implementing complex organizational change involves collective actions by many people, each of whom contribute to the implementation effort. But implementation is often a team sport, he calls it. And that's kind of how I see it, especially with these employer groups, with the employees being a team. But problems arise when some feel committed to implementing the change where others do not. And again, kind of looking at it from the employees' lens, this change can be, I think, frightening too, and a lot of times fear is oftentimes a debilitator in people being willing to make a change. So they're going to have to be kind of walked through this, and does kind of talk about timing and setting a pace for change, and potentially maybe not coming on with the first renewal saying, hey, this is what we're going to do and change everything around, but maybe laying the groundwork for that change at this renewal, saying, look, changes are going to be coming down the pike, or maybe even a 3 to 5 year, hopefully not that long, but 2 to 3 year plan, so that they understand it. And they have to have, I think, buy-in at the employee level. I think also talks about, shared beliefs, and I think, and collective abilities, because implementation entails collective or conjoint action among independent individuals. And for them to buy in, again, I'm just thinking of it in the scenario that we're trying to have them make this change. I don't think it's going to be difficult either, as Lee stated, because they know they felt are feeling the pain now with the higher cost. So I think it's going to be easier to get them to buy in. I think we also have to be honest, though, with the potential pitfalls with balanced billing. But as long as we walk them through that and help them understand they're not alone, I think that will help with that situation. So also with the employers and employees, he talks about consistent leadership messages and actions and information sharing through social interaction, how critical that is to the experience when going through these huge type changes like this. All right. And again, he talks a lot about the members' value the specific impending change. For example, do they think it's needed? Do they think it's important, beneficial, or worthwhile? And again, depending on who you're talking about, I think employees will definitely see that, employers as well, with regards to the expense we're talking about. I also, like I said, brought in providers and brokers, because in my mind, I'm thinking through this change as an agency, and how I present this to my managers, really owners of our agency, because they're definitely not kind of on board with this. This would be a big change for an agency as well, to change their model. It changes it in a number of different ways. If we're talking about a no network, no PPO, going direct, we're also talking about no commissions anymore, like we've learned from Dave Contorno. So how you actually present that to owners of the agency to be able to get them to buy in. And then finally, providers, the medical profession, how it's going to change their experience a little bit. And again, I think in a lot of ways it could boost their experience. Of course, they have potential for losing money, so they're the ones who might have a lot of pushback, I guess, and been reading a lot of articles about that. But anyway, urgently needed. I think all of these employers, employer group, employees, brokers, kind of feel that sense of urgency. The providers might be the ones who don't feel that sense of urgency. Does talk about in this article about how not everybody has to have the same value. They might all find different value in the change, and that isn't necessarily a bad thing. Might not necessarily that all organizations members value an organizational change for the same reasons. They calls that change balance. Resulting from desperate reasons might be just as potent a determinant of change commitment as change balance resulting from commonly shared values or reasons. So I thought that was interesting too, just as long as they're on board for the change. And then he talks about, again, about the task demands, resource availability, and situational factors. They have to know, for example, what it'll take to implement the change effectively. So task demands, resource availability. Do we have the resources to implement this change effectively on all levels? And then the situational factors. Can we implement this change effectively given the situation or the current situation that we face? So yeah, does the organization have the human, financial, material, and informational resources necessary to implement the change as well? And he talks about contextual factors within the organization, organizational culture that embraces innovation and risk-taking, learning, supports organizational readiness for change. And I think he kind of makes, sometimes it's a little bit obvious of observations. When organizational readiness for change is high, organization members are more likely to initiate change.
Yeah, that's kind of what that means, right? Yeah.
Kind of makes sense to me. But they also exert greater effort in support of the change and exhibit greater persistence in the face of any obstacles or setbacks that come to them throughout the change. So I thought it was a very interesting article. I think I probably wrote my paper in a little bit different way than maybe was assigned. But that's what I'm always thinking with these classes is how is this going to pertain and how is this going to work? And I like how it got me to think, well, from the employer's perspective, from the employee's perspective, from the providers and the brokers, how is this change actually going to happen?
Right. Are they ready for change is a very big deal, right? Kind of like when Kotter's burning platform, but even more so, deep down in their emotional state, are they ready for this, right?
Right.
Good. All right. Who would like to go next?
I can go.
Go. All righty.
I think I might be the last one, so by default. So I like everybody else, kind of struggled to find an article that was completely appropriate to, the benefits space. So, took it as an opportunity to, one, like Ryan, read more articles than I probably wanted to read on this, but two, also, sort of enrich my learning on the provider focus side. So both the articles I read, like a lot of you, are focused on the delivery side. So one of them is actually an interview with I got a new C-suite acronym, a CNO, a Chief Nursing Officer at the University of Iowa. Excuse me. And it was interesting, partly just because it was a different perspective, and partly because it was it focused a lot on the safety of the patients. He manages a group of 3,000 nurses and hires about 450 a year and educates about that many every year coming out of the University of Iowa. So his view is really global, but it was amazing to me how quickly it got down into the nuts and bolts of, like, we need individual people to have these individual results and take ownership of it. So it made it a lot more personal than, global change management. And that really, I thought, captured a lot of what we're talking about, is it needs to be personal to somebody. And the way that he made it personal was through data. And there was one sort of hand washing compliance, that hand washing and chlorhexidine bathing, which I'm not exactly sure what that is, but hygiene was tied in with that. And he said you can't get 90% compliance rates in an organization this complex until you've done the due diligence of educating nurses and enhancing their understanding of the role they play in producing high quality, safe patient care. So, again, making it personal to them. Like, I can't imagine a nurse out there that's like, I don't really care about patient safety. That's their focus. The way that they sort of rolled this out is that patient information was displayed as soon as it was updated on the electronic medical record. It was displayed on screens located throughout the units, so that they could easily see, like, who has the highest risk of infection at this given point, what that data was, and how it was displayed, and what all of those sort of key bits really didn't flesh out in this, but it made a difference, essentially. And so that kind of led me to more broadly just falling back on the old adages of, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it, and that change is constant. So, having an organization that's able to adapt to constant change is, another theme that the interview had. And then the other article that I read was really future focused, of like where healthcare is going. And they talked a lot about, health. The one thing that stood out in that article was that healthcare is becoming a real market. And I have sort of some opinions on that. So whether healthcare is an actual market where consumers are making decisions, I would say no, but that is absolutely the root of what we're talking about here, because you can't make decisions without prices and value baked into that. So the other article I read was really putting forward that, you know, we're in the last 10 years, we've a lot of markets have changed to make them more consumer friendly, more open, more asset free was one interesting thing I learned. So like Uber is sort of an asset free consumable. So it's all you have to do is download an app, and that's your investment, which is nothing. So applying that to healthcare delivery and using that sort of quick change technology and, you know, asset free development to make healthcare become a real market is, you know, it didn't dive really deep into that, but it really got my wheels turning about that is really the central focus of what we're doing, you know, and trying to fight the good fight and make it a real market for both employers and for employees. Pretty much anybody that's actually buying healthcare needs to know these things.
Okay, so let me ask you a question from the outside looking in, not somebody's not all familiar. So how do I make a value decision as a buyer when I don't know the price of anything? Right. I get hung up on this all the time. They go to the ER, you know, with one of my kids when we're going to start an IV line in. I'm like, how much does that cost? We don't know. Right? Can I find out? Not really.
Why would you ask that, Lee? That's so weird.
Yeah, I know, right? When I said, you know, when I take my car and the guy says, you want me to flush your radiator? I'm like, oh, I haven't really done that in a really long time. What's that cost? I don't know. We probably do it for like $80. Might be a little more if we get into trouble. Up to 100. Okay, 80 to 100. Yeah, okay. If I could ever get a answer that straight out of a medical person, I'd fall over. I swear. Right? It drives me nuts. I can't make decisions because I don't know what the value is on anything. Right?
You should take the rest of these courses.
I should.
I'll get you all the values. I promise.
Well,
but you're right. Right, exactly right.
Crazy, right.
That was the other part that they got my wheels spinning and kind of getting down to the root cause of why healthcare is so. It hasn't changed at the pace of other technologies like cabs and Uber. Is because it's so fragmented, and it's a very emotional decision, and we've all been trained to not ask the question of what does it cost, because as soon as you ask that, you're questioning the value of the person who literally has your life in their hands. So we have to somehow disassociate the emotional and the sort of godlike qualities that doctors have over us and feel empowered to ask good questions, or maybe not even have to ask those questions of our doctor when we're in the consulting room. It's, you know, so tools that allow us to have a proper assessment of value has been like the talk of our industry for the last 10 or 15 years, and it's still just wheels turning in my mind.
I think there's a reason they're keeping that from us, quite frankly, right?
A lot of inertia with the insurance company. It was interesting when you said, Alex, about the asset free. You know, our local hospital here had I guess, would you say, challenging year, Lee?
Yeah.
Looks to about published minus $1 million, but $100 million. But so it's been hard. So I know a lot of the executives there, and they haven't given a lot away, but the one thing they've all been consistent on is we're not going to have any more buildings. There's no more building going on. So they are going to rely some on virtual. They are going to go more hard asset free, I guess. Liz, I don't know if you're still there. I had a question. If you
there she is.
Sorry. And you're muted, so I won't make fun of you for not answering.
There you go.
But you talked about being ready for change. And if you had to say there was one biggest thing that you took away from that article or your readings, if you were looking for one barometer of whether a company was ready to change or not, is there one thing that you'd say?
Well, I think urgency probably, and just, everyone valuing the change, and the value, I think, can be seen in the state of the situation where we find ourselves with the prices just being so crazy. So everybody being able to be ready for change by seeing the value in it and being ready to jump on board.
So they're feeling the pain, I guess.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
okay,
what I think.
go ahead.
Like Lee said, I think in the employer and employee side, it should be a little bit easier to sell this story than to say the providers. It's the providers we're going to get the pushback from, because they don't see the value in it for them, because they're potentially going to decrease their revenue stream, from that. Right? Well,
actually, I think the providers that I've talked with are not upset. The facilities are.
Facilities. Right.
Yeah, because the providers themselves are probably getting 40 or 50% over Medicare now, in a lot of cases, at least here, where the facilities are getting a lot more than that.
Right. I'm using the word providers when I should be saying hospitals, facilities.
So I'm thinking, based on what you said, I might have used the wrong approach today in Washington. What do you think? Was it?
Yeah, I want to hear about that.
Oh, we can't see it.
Maybe they weren't. What's that?
It's thinking.
Got your screen sharing, but there's nothing on it yet.
Is it a picture?
Go to the front. I thought I did. Let me try that again.
Yeah.
The timing was so perfect too. That would have been.
I know you were trying to slide right into it. There we go.
Nice.
Like it.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Look at him go.
Lick's a little stage. That guy has a smile on his face.
Clint. That's Clint Flanagan, CEO of Nextera. Him, I know. And Garrison wasn't paying attention. He's kind of the father of VPC. So I yelled at him, and then he turned.
Are you going to tell us about that?
Senator got there. What's that?
Are you going to share with us your day? It sounded pretty exciting.
That's quite a room.
That's the what do they call that? Had a briefing in there from Senator, but it's I'll send you the room. It didn't mean anything to me at the time, but everybody else knew it. Cab driver knew it, so that was good. But it was interesting, and after that, this was the fly-in, so there were a lot of direct primary care doctors that were going to visit different congressmen, senators, but really the staffers. So it's a good experience. It was very interesting, the preparation piece. So the day before, we had the steering committee meeting, and we talked about how to approach a Democrat versus a Republican. And this was all about the bill that's out there. So 213D, 223C, that is right now, if you have, as I think the Lachecks found out, if you have an HSA, you cannot use that money to pay for BPC. You can use it to pay for concierge medicine. Did you know that? But not DPC. So this bill would eradicate that. So it was interesting. Sat with, if you're going to approach a Democrat, the last thing you want to talk about is the last thing you want to mention is HSA, because the association there is HSA is there for the big money people. They're rolling it. They're using this for retirement. That's not what we need is HSA expansion. You need to talk about how this makes healthcare more affordable. Whereas if you approach a Republican, it's fine to talk about HSAs. They want to expand the use of that. So anyway, I had two Democrats that I was calling on, and so we didn't mention HCA. I went with a DPC physician out of Arlington. But the staffers that we met with did not know what direct primary care was. So,
wow.
How far do you push things when you And so anyway, we got through that explanation, and they say, so wait, so all you're asking for is that you can pay for this out of HSA? I see, yeah, we got a couple in Pennsylvania. It has, you know, they're talking to a trucking company, construction company, and it was a slam dunk. They have their HSAs set up. They love the DPC opportunity, and they couldn't pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
But
I did not know you couldn't pay for direct primary care through HSA.
Right. That's what this bill's about. Yeah. That's trying to get passed. So we're trying to get, you know, enough votes to get that passed. But I hadn't been through that process. I'm a pretty apolitical person. And I would that would be a living hell for me. I could never do what Jay Keys does. He's really good at that. I mean, you know, the big thing, of course, when you're in that kind of position is you don't want to cut off any opportunities or cut off any avenues before you have to. And it's you know, even if you hate what the person's saying, you try to find something in there that could be a potential next step to a common platform. He does that so much better than I could ever do that. It's made me jealous. But
so Tom, can I share? Just this afternoon, I was talking to my cohort, who again has been in this business for like 35 years and has a great book of business. Talking to him about direct primary care, because I have on my calendar next week to meet with Care Here, which is a DPC group, to meet with me, and he called it a gimmick. He said that's a gimmick and it's not going to last and blah blah blah. And I mean, I'm like, Bob, maybe just open your mind a little bit, you know, I mean, be open to some changes. And he's just totally not. That's why I'm starting to think my agency might not be open to this entire model. But what do you think about him calling it a gimmick?
Well, what's going to happen, this is the same thing when we started Sonospine, to avoid spinal fusions. This is a high frequency ultrasonic surgical technology. And so the fear in going to the insurance companies and getting a code for this is that if somebody else, some other doctor came in and said, oh, look at that CPT code, it's getting $3,000 more than a scalpel, whatever, everybody's going to use that. And a lot of people weren't skilled enough to do that. So we didn't do that. We felt that if you give the ultrasound a bad name to begin with, that's going to be a really bad thing. You know, I think with the growth of direct primary care, there are people out there that are just saying, I'm going to be DPC, and that's it. And one of the challenges DPC is facing right now is there's no real continuity in how you define it. The range of services is different. It's different by geography. So, you know, in terms of, again, I mean, I wasn't a believer, you know, 18 months ago. I am now. I mean, but it is getting the right group in there. So I would not call it a gimmick. I mean, I'll talk to him about that. But if you have an agreement that, I mean, I've run in now since actually the late checks brought to my attention. I've run into 2 direct primary cares now that will offer, you know, it's the same day or next day appointment, 24/7 telehealth, mental health resources, physical therapy, occupational therapy, imaging, blood work and lab tests, basic labs, you know, $110 a month.
300 formularies, Tom.
What's that?
For 300, no copay formulary prescription drugs included in the program. That's huge.
Yeah, I'd like to see what the 300, I mean, you know, that is good. I mean, it's not bad. But with the other hand, if you have an $80 PMPM capitated pharmaceutical for all your drugs, period, that's, anyway, you start to put together a model where it's almost fixed. You know, it's almost a fixed price. You can almost say it's $400. We're done. You know, not quite there, but I don't think it's far. And I've talked to now 2 or 3. You know, of course, Nurse Deb says if you have the DPC that's strong and the PBM, you just need us. We'll find the lowest cost and highest quality procedure near you. There's also Centivo. I don't know if anyone's dealt with Centivo. Have you dealt with them, Robson? Are you there?
He's probably out fighting the storm.
Okay. I thought he had, or Brett, but
I'm here. I'm sorry, I just had a little dinner in my mouth.
Can you fax them over? I just drove back. No, don't fax send it over. I'm just kidding. But have you dealt with Centivo, the TPA?
No, I haven't. I think there's so many of these TPAs coming out, and we get so many calls. It's been really challenging. A lot of things have been happening real fast in the last 6 months.
So I met with Mary Moore, I think her name was, VP up there that started, and she was another person that said that they can direct you to the highest quality, lowest cost also. Once you get past, the DPC and DPC imaging pharmaceuticals, they can take care of the rest. So I think it would be good for me, but for Liz too, just put a short video together to say, look, here's what it looks like. Here's the whole package. Here's your frequently asked questions, answers. It's real. I'm not kidding. There you go. So
that'd be great.
Tom, Liz, if you'd like, I could send you the information from Patrick Riley, who is the owner and facilitator for Empower 3. And he can really do a great job of explaining how a DPC works from a physician standpoint and from a business center standpoint. So I could send you his information. He'll be happy to talk to you.
That'd be great.
It was very enlightening.
Yeah, Liz, I just really quickly, I met with one last week for the first time too, and one thing that has not been mentioned yet was the on-site clinics that they do, where they'll actually go, and so that we have two huge corporations here in Portland that I know of them very well. They're massive, and they have these guys. And I was talking to the guy whose name was Lester Baskin. I think he actually went where, yeah, Tom knows. Yeah,
he was sitting in front of me. He said, "I know Ryan Willis."
Yeah, we had lunch last week. But yeah, so basically the on-site clinic thing, he'll go there, 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon and then 4 hours on a Thursday morning, and the response has just been overwhelming. It's just like these guys, the employees, they don't have to take time off. They don't have to do anything. They just go right in and they get everything they need. So, I mean, it's the whole, I was very speculative too at first, but it really, he sold me on it. And I had people here in my office, same that you had, where they said, oh, it's gimmicky, it's this or that. It just took education. I just told them exactly what it is. And they're like, oh, okay, well, I think anything that sounds new is going to scare people. They're just automatically going to say it's gimmicky just because they're uneducated about it. That's my opinion.
I agree.
Or they're just limited by organizational change within an industry. So it's been interesting. Yeah.
Hey, how topical.
What you've spoken to now is the ultimate challenges we face, and we sometimes forget to put it in the right order for change versus the right order to make a sale.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to sell it to my agency. Yeah, good point. That's why this article is good to help me think that through. Not there yet, but getting there.
There's some really good statistics about how DPC saves money in the end, where people are getting better care when they need it. And ultimately, it's a stitch in time saves 9 thing. And there's a lot of good statistics out there about that too.
And the vice president of Boeing was also at the meeting talking about, and of course they implemented this years ago and have had tremendous success with it downstream.
Mm-hmm.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Very cool you got to do that.
It is. It was very cool for them to have me.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm sure they realized that after you were there.
I made sure they did. But they would be glad to come talk. So the Boeing person, I think, would probably be good to talk with. Have them available. And I apologize being late tonight.
That's all right.
Real Men Wear Pink dinner. So I'm doing that this year. And so the cancer fundraising. So,
yeah.
There you go.
Hey, Tom, can I bring up a quick question? So I was making a presentation today for HR Houston and kind of pulled up some second opinion perspectives from Chevron's kind of playbook. I think employers need to know that it's not that they're gigantic companies that are making these changes, that they sell the benefits of it to their employees, because truly it's ultimately a numbers game for them. And I saw a lot of people open their eyes to be like, well, if Chevron's doing it, why aren't we looking into it? So I think those big box folks who are doing innovative things, or what we deem as innovative. Very helpful to this course.
Okay, so size, so you're saying not the Chevron example would sell people. I mean, you're talking about how to get a smaller company interested, or thinking that they're
No,
not
just that by getting the big companies explaining why they're doing these things, they're often selling the benefit to the employee, not to their bottom line. But we can cut through the BS and understand it's a bottom line decision that provides benefits to the employees.
Mm-hmm. And I think also the secondary benefit of that to Liz and others would be what all of you that are dealing with smaller companies is that if the bigger companies are really doing this, then it must not be voodoo. I mean, you know, it's not fringe. They've actually embraced it.
Yeah, usually the assumption is if the big boys are doing it, they have the resources to check it out, right? And so they've probably done a thorough job, and that's I'm much more likely to follow that than not, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
well, Tom, that was and also y'all like a really great kind of stat that Sean Skansen said during the Health Rosetta event this week, kind of got put out by Josh Butler, was that we're not looking to change 15 million lives. We're trying to find 50,000 companies with 300 lives to make a difference. You know, it changed the perspective of where change can happen, not so much in the grand number, but in the small units.
Okay.
That was what someone mentioned before about collaboration. Dave Chase said that in a phone call I had too, is that it's, you know, start with the smaller companies. They're easier to get commitments from, and then you get a critical mass, and then it grows like that, which was an interesting. He's been through this for a long time, so. Have we talked about next week's?
No, I was just going to ask you. Why don't you give us the rundown on the status of that? The panel?
I thought you had that.
No, go.
Okay. So I was going to get some input from you all, but I thought, you know, the genesis of this panel discussion came about. I guess Robson or Alex, you were around when it happened. It was in the first course or two, I guess, maybe second course we were talking about. Is we got into a discussion because the advisors and Kelly really was the only HR person that started early. We're talking about how do I even get in to talk to you about this? What's the approach to educate you? And Kelly was pretty straight in the feedback. Don't give me your fluff. Don't give me this foo-foo. Bring some facts. And so we got to a point where he said, why don't we have a chance to air these questions? I mean, so the difficulties that Liz or the late checks or, you know, Alex, Ryan have, Robson getting the first appointment, or how far do you go in the first appointment with regard to education versus a plan, and then HR and CFOs, you have a lot of people calling you. You have to prioritize your time. So what can the advisor say that's going to make an impact with you? So I thought that what we would do is have everybody come with, you can maybe it's good to get a few questions ahead of time so we can consolidate them from everybody. So we're not asking the same thing 30 times, but have everyone go around. You know, you ask a question, someone from the advisor side ask, and the HR CFO side answer. And then, you know, CFO, HR, you have a question or complaint about advisors, you just get it out there and there's some response. So I thought it would, you know, flow something like that. Not that that's a defined flow really, but, you know, just alternate questions going back and forth. Somehow this group, I think, could carry that conversation for a while.
Well, Tom, we did earlier in the class kind of, you know, and I started kind of spoke to like framing the problems, and that from the problem we can kind of then speak to an opportunity to deliver a solution. Maybe a framework around that could be real helpful, because we always want to know, hey, how to get the first meeting, but that was interesting to Cotter's perspective.
So give Do you have one example that you're thinking about in particular?
There was kind of a give your employees more benefits. That the story that was spoken earlier, like the urgency of that, kind of just the problem isn't that I can't give you solutions, is that you don't understand that solutions exist, or no one believes that healthcare could be controlled until we were able to share how to do it. I don't know. It's getting into the mindset of those decision makers.
So you're saying that would be a scenario or background or framework that you're talking about that you would like some input from Terry or Kelly?
Yeah, because kind of in the beginning of the class, again, like it was kind of this, like, this how do we create change? And we're coming in trying to ask questions, have an inside track into the, speaking to the problem, not the solution.
I'm not sure I'm quite there yet, but I'm getting there.
Well, then disregard. I'll send you the email. That's hilarious. That I've been thinking about this last 2 days, and I'm all over the place and a bunch of noise in the house. So I apologize.
No, that's good. I mean, you have good thoughts. So, I guess would it involve anything more than? Do you think this would be better if, Robson, you wrote something up and folks had the chance to look at it for a couple of days first? I mean, this goes for everybody, I guess. Or would you like to hear the questions and then become prepared? Or
I think with this group, I think it's going to flow. I'm not too concerned about it. I don't want to get. I mean, this is just my opinion, but I don't want to get stuck too much on form. I appreciate what the suggestions, but I have questions. I mean, we can send to somebody, but I'd kind of like to have it flow. And I think this group's pretty good.
I agree with Ryan, because I don't want to, give questions and then Terry's spending a lot of time researching it to make sure she gives the right answer. I think it's more appropriate to say, hey, Terry, so let me pick your brain for a second. Here's my question. I met with an employer. What was their standoff? Why would you go with a larger broker versus a smaller one? I think it would be a really easy flow as well. I agree with Ryan.
Yeah, I don't need the questions beforehand. If we're worried about having too many topics, I don't think that's a big concern either, because it's a pretty deep subject. And I'll tell you exactly what my experiences are, and I know Kelly will too.
Okay, yeah, the biggest reason I was going to see questions is to avoid a lot of duplication, but
yes,
that's really it. But okay. And
I can't tell you, Tom, whether other two people that work with me are going to be able to participate, because our HR director has just had a surgery that she might not even be available next week. So, and my controller is on vacation, and he hasn't told me yet whether he's going to take a vacation hour out or not.
Okay. He reports to you, right?
Yes.
I think you might find it
taking vacation time.
Just saying.
That could cost me big time.
Alex, are you swinging at a kid or a bug? He's muted. Maybe that was better. Okay.
Sorry, I'm chasing down a moth.
Okay. Okay, so if you could maybe just send a few of the questions to Lee or to me. We won't share them with the other group or anything like that. But if we have 38 of the same questions from everybody, we might just have a follow-up round. Maybe not.
Yeah. So do we want to start at 7 next week too? Everybody okay with that?
Thought it might be 7 to midnight.
Yeah, 7 to midnight. That sounds good. Okay.
Perfect.
Drink some coffee. We can take a break.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's about it for tonight. We've gone through enough stuff. I think That's it. Just a reminder, well, the second reflective narrative is due next week. This panel discussion should be interesting. I think that's about it.
I have a question for
Yes.
you, Lee. A structure question. I thought that this today's assignment was due today.
Me too.
Well, then when I went in, I got a message that I was 12 hours late.
I was 15 hours late.
Oh, that's okay. I might probably just dial the wrong date in on the assignment folder in Moodle. That's okay. Don't sweat that.
Okay.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Tom,
It's in red. It's like flashing.
Yeah. Some professors say, oh, they'll lock the folder at 8 p.m. on this date. The folder's locked. You can't put your homework in. You get a 0, right? I am not that kind of.
Thank God.
No.
I was stressing, weren't you, Terry?
Yeah, I don't like getting dinged. I'm not.
Me either.
You know?
No.
Those red letters were intimidating.
Were they?
Tom, I had a real quick question.
For next week, I see presentations of peer-reviewed articles are due.
Yeah, if anybody didn't go today, they can go next week, right? So
okay.
This is what we were doing now, right? So we can, if there's any that didn't get finished, we can do those next week. That's it.
So are any of our people at this Health Rosetta event? I guess, Tom, you probably know a lot of the people there.
I think Brett's there.
With the Health
Yeah,
Rosetta.
Brett's there.
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of postings from it, but I'd love to be there. That's awesome. Of course, David Contorno, Julie, I think.
Julie Boban.
One Beacon.
Yeah.
Who's from One Beacon?
Well, hey, y'all, I don't mind kind of getting a download from 3 or 5, 10 people about the event. I couldn't make it at a presentation today, but I buy you tickets, you buy your plane flight, and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be somewhere else. But I have a considered effort to get the download on it as one of those Health Rosetta advisors. So I'd be happy to kind of hopefully put it together over the next week to maybe 2 weeks, so I can be able to share that with y'all.
That'd be awesome.
Oh yeah, that would be great.
No problem.
Liz, where are you getting those updates from?
LinkedIn. Every time
LinkedIn.
I just try to connect with everybody. I just connected with Marty. How do you say that? Marty McCary.
Yeah, Macri.
Yesterday.
Yeah, Macri. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Macri. I guess he had a surprise. So I love LinkedIn. I've just been seeing a ton of posts from Emma and all those people about the Health Rosetta Advisory Summit, and wishing we were there.
Did anybody listen to the Relentless Health Value podcast, the interview with Marty McCurry?
No.
It's awesome. I would highly recommend it.
Relentless what?
Relentless Health Value.
And he, I guess you all have you read the book Unaccountable?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. So he wrote that book. Yeah. And he was, so I saw him after a conference a year ago and talked to him for a little bit. And I got a book and he was going to sign it for me. And I said, could you say, Tom, thank you for your mentorship over the last 2 decades. You've made me what I am. He smiled, grinned, but he didn't write that. So, anyway. But Unaccountable is a great book.
By who?
Marty McCary.
So he also wrote The Price We Pay. That's his newest?
That's his newest. Unaccountable is his first one, where he talks about Dr. Hodan, and that's have you heard about Dr. Hodan?
I think so. The Indian, is he the one whose father passed away? No.
No. He's actually a fictional doctor. So he was working. Part of his residency was at Harvard, and during the time at Harvard, there was a 60-year-old surgeon, silver hair, great with patients. Afterward, they called him Dr. Hodad for a long time. He didn't know why. And he asked people and they wouldn't tell him. And finally, in the last week of his internship, they said, well, that stands for Hands of Death and Destruction. He said, what? He said, he's horrible in the OR. But it turns out, so his whole point about safety, and he has a safety survey taken, but his point about safety is, unless you're in the OR with him, you don't know what happens. Because when you come out and your stomach's cut to bit and you had to stay there a week, you had the worst case I've ever seen. That polyp was big as a watermelon. I didn't know what to do. You know, nobody knows what happened, but he was a silver-tongued devil. I mean, great with patients. And so that's where he's come from the whole time, is that unless you know what goes on in the OR, you probably shouldn't be talking about who are the best doctors.
There's a whole podcast, Dr. Death. Have you heard about Dr. Death? It's a whole podcast about this one doctor in Texas who's same thing. And the other physicians wouldn't even report. It took a long time for them to even report him, even though they knew he was horrible.
Yeah, he said, and that's what he said. There was a fellow who did a new surgeon did 6 open heart surgeries in a row. All the patients died. But the doctor's had his back, because he would work weekends. He would do on call. He would, he'd do all this stuff. And it's kind of, I'm not saying it was a cheery book, but it was informative.
Well, it's just deceiving, because that the Dr. Hodad guy, he was so nice and loving and really great with the patients. And then there was the other doctor who was not so lovey-dovey, but he was the best. And his, he had the highest success rate. So it's not just personality.
Right. House. Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's good to see you all again.
Yeah. All right. Well, glad you had an interesting day.
Yeah.
It's fun.
Yes. All right. All right.
So see you next week for the hot debates. It'll be great.
Okay. Sounds like fun. Bring your questions. Bring your popcorn. It'll be fun.
Okay.
Excellent.
Good night, everybody.
All right.
Bye.
Thank you, Robson, down in Houston. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.